Hey everybody, Paul Sizer here from Cafe Digital Studios, and today I'm going to talk about how I take vector images that I create in Illustrator and port them over to Photoshop and then do a textured airbrush toning to them to give them more of a volumetric feel. So if you've seen work that I've done, you've probably seen this technique before, but I thought I would just go ahead and go over it a little bit, sort of show you how I start out in one program, transfer it to another program, and kind of finalize the look of things here. So we're going to start out first by taking a look at this image that I did a couple of years ago of one of my all-time musical and creative idols, Prince. And I'm going to use this as an example of how I start and go from vector to Photoshop and then give kind of a old, retro, decayed look to things by just using some simple techniques and some simple airbrush settings. So enough yakking, let's go ahead and talk here. So what we're looking at here is a Adobe Illustrator drawing that I did of Prince. I'm going to do Command Y, and we can see this is just a vector shape. I try to always work as simply as possible when I'm working in any kind of program. So we can see here that these are just the simple shapes and forms that I put together for creating his face, kind of improvisationally. But again, just distilling things down to the most simple forms to get across the idea, the most simple shapes, not trying to have a bunch of extra stuff, but also knowing that since this isn't going to be the end place, um, I'm using this simple vector form to give myself simple shapes and simple color areas that are going to be easily selectable in Photoshop. So I've done kind of some of the work or half the work here, meaning just picking out the shapes that I want, figuring out details, and getting this refined to a point where I'm happy with. So um, at this point, what I would do is if I'm happy with the shape and happy with how it looks, I'm going to go ahead and just select Prince here, and I'm going to copy and paste this vector shape into my Photoshop file. So Command C. And we'll go ahead and minimize that down, and that should take us to Photoshop. So here we go. Um, so when you copy stuff to the clipboard from Illustrator, it remains in the clipboard as a vector image, and when you paste into Photoshop, you should Command V. There we go. It gives you the option of how you want to bring this in here. So most times, if I've done stuff like this, I'm going to bring it in just as pixels. Um, I use smart objects once in a while and every once in a while if I'm, again, doing something that I know I'm going to be updating the artwork. But 9 times out of 10, I'm going to go ahead and just bring this in as just straight up pixels. And what this is doing is that this will allow you to, when you bring it in as pixels, Photoshop is taking the vector information from Illustrator and then it's redrawing it in Photoshop. So you're going to get um, a super clean rendering of this because you're forcing Photoshop to redraw based on all the very precise and mathematical um, vector information that it's bringing in. So when I go ahead and click OK, we have Prince. Now, one thing that I found this out, and it's kind of groovy, is that with this X that you're seeing through here, that means that this is still an unplaced object, meaning that you can scale this at this point, and Photoshop has not yet done its rendering. So what that means is that you can scale this at this point, and you will not destroy or um, hurt this image, or not degrade it in any way, because it still has not rendered that. So I'm going to just try and make Prince a little bit bigger there, because I just want to sort of focus on his face and head for the purpose of this. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Now this is an unplaced image that I brought in. So as soon as I get it to the size that I want, and as soon as I go ahead and double click on it, this now has been drawn at a high resolution. So as we can see, as we view up on this, very, very crisp, very clean. This is at 200%, and that looks super precise. So we have nice clean edges, nice sharp edges. It's exactly as sharp as I drew it in Illustrator. And there we go. So that's a lossless way for you to be able to bring things in and resize them in Photoshop. And then once you make the commitment to that, Photoshop will redraw it at the high resolution that you're working at. So that's kind of nice too. It means you'll get good clean selections. So as I've talked about in some of my other videos, now when we're looking at this, this is something where we have a set of colors and a set of tones that are easily selectable by using the selection tool, or using the magic wand tool rather. So as I go through here, I can select portions that I want to have selected, and it will go through and it will make a very clean, very precise selection to that color tone, and then I can do things to that color tone that that I want to. So I'm going to take a look at this, and the intent, I'm going to set up a few things here with brushes. So I'm going to go ahead and just go back to just kind of a standard brush in Photoshop. Nothing too fancy. Just going to have, again, a very soft brush. Size I'm going to change as I go through. But my intent with this is that I want to add a little bit of toning to this, or a little bit of shading on edges to imply shadows, or to give a little bit more of a volumetric feel to the flat forms that I have here in this Illustrator, in this vector-based form. So the change that I'm going to do with this, however, is I am going to set my brush rather than normal, which again, if I have a very soft brush, my normal airbrush with this would produce a very soft edge brush like this. But for the kind of retro, or a little bit of decayed, or a little bit more of a textural feel, or a little bit more actually of a, I would say like a spray paint type feel, I'm going to set my brush to dissolve. So what dissolve does is, in a sense, it's making a bitmap texture. So we can see as I go through here, you can see that that edge is actually, in fact, it's actually kind of a dithered bitmap look. And to me, that has a nice kind of a gritty textural feel. It doesn't look too soft, but the thing that I like about it also is that it also kind of works nicely and gives a more graphical feel to these very sharp shapes here. So I like the juxtaposition of using the flat forms like this, very vector-shaped forms, and then shading it with a very graphical kind of tone thing. The two of them, I think they work pretty well together, and I kind of like having that grittier, a little more interesting textural feel to the shading that I'm doing. So with this, like I've described before, the idea behind doing any kind of shading is that you are doing things that will enhance or amplify, or to just make a stronger feel of volumetric feel. So you're doing shadows and edges to make things have a little bit of a more volume as they map around a form, as they map around a shape. So in that same way here, I want to find ways to put enough shadows in here to kind of emphasize stuff. So I'm going to kind of start out with a couple of different things with this. And first thing is, I want to put a little bit of a shadow where his hair is going to be overlapping his forehead here. So the same thing is that I would start out with my magic wand tool to select his face. And since I've got this hard line here that's giving this purple section of the darker side of his face, I'm going to sample with my airbrush. I'm going to sample Command Option, or I'm just going to hit Option key to get the eyedropper tool. I'm going to select the purple that's over here for the color that I want to use. But again, since I have a selected area over here, nothing's going to happen anywhere out here. It's going to happen just when I make a selection here. Or I've made the selection, anything I do with the airbrush in here. So at this point right now, and I've talked about this before, is that when you're looking at the brush, you can see the little pointer, the little crosshair in the center. That's going to be the strongest part of the brush, and then your brush, the intensity of the brush will radiate out from there if you have it set to soft. So what I will tend to do is I'll always use a bigger brush than I really want to use, but that means I can control where I lay that brush and where I get the actual feel of this. Now the dissolve setting on a brush does not alter the color as it passes over another color. So you have to make your decisions of what color you want manually rather than trying to do anything of allowing it like multiply does, where it takes a color over another color and makes it darker or lighter based on a brush setting. This is, you have to commit to what the colors are actually going to be. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of strokes here to add that in there on his forehead. Maybe take it a little bit down his face there. And as I said, the nice thing about this, if I go ahead and hide that selection, is that sort of takes this very hard edge that I have here, graphically drawn, but then since I use the same color, it kind of morphs it from a straight hard line to one that looks a little more natural. And again, because I mapped it along the feel of how his forehead is mapping along the skull, it gives it a little bit more of a volumetric feel. In that same way, I could, while that's in there, select this light color, the skin tone that I have on purple. And if I wanted to do some highlights, I could just kind of go straight up from where I was. And then if I wanted to, if I wanted to do a highlight against the nose there, I could do that. Okay, so deselect. So the same thing, I'm going to take the dark side of his face here and select that with my magic wand. Now again, it's selected this area over here. If I absolutely don't want to have this area over here messed with in any way, I could use my lasso tool and just hit the Option key so it gets the little negative sign there. And then I could just go here and kind of just select around that area and deselect that, so the selection I have is now just on this side of his face. So the same thing, I'll go back to my brush tool, I'm going to sample the purple that I have in his face, and I'm going to manually move this down a little bit so again I can see the dark section here and see how dark I want to get it. So let's go ahead and go appreciably darker. All right. Again, I'm going to get a little bit larger brush, and now I'm going to sort of use the same logic that I used over here, where I'm going to move my the shadow that I'm going to put over his face. Again, I'm going to volumetrically kind of move there, and again, kind of push that around. I might want to do a little bit over his eyes, just kind of to emphasize that. Maybe just kind of down the side of his face. And I've got his neck kind of selected here, so what I also might do is I might just kind of draw that along here and just kind of do a few things to kind of emphasize the area under his chin. Yeah. So the same thing is that what I've found is, like most things, actually going to go back over to this side while I'm talking. Like most things, sort of finding the smallest amount you can do to get the bang for your buck is always kind of a good idea. I want to just put a little bit of an eyeliner above his eye here. So if you can achieve a feel with one or two well placed shades or whatever, rather than doing a ton of them, it's just going to look cleaner and it's going to look a little more controlled, and you're letting a good effect do a good job rather than a bunch of effects kind of fighting for attention. And with most artists that I study, they're all going to tell you that economy of effect or economy of render is always going to serve you better. Keeping things absolutely as simple as possible just means that you're not getting something that's too convoluted or whatever. So since I'm using a tablet, my preference usually for making these kinds of things is to do this manually, meaning that I'm moving around with my brush manually with my arm and hand, and I'm hand doing these shapes. So I'm not using a gradient tool, or I'm not using something like that, because that's a little bit more, I'm able to do it by hand, and if I'm able to do it by hand, it's something that gives me the opportunity to be able to, again, keep things organic. The only trouble with this is that it's harder to replicate because you're not doing something methodically, or you don't have like a setting or a guideline that you can always follow. That's a risk, but I ultimately think that having a little bit more of a improvisational feel, or a little more of a natural feel, being able to do things by hand rather, lets you keep an organic quality to the illustrations that I really like. So same thing here. I might do a little bit of shading. Actually, I think in the poster I did some shading where I wanted to emphasize the ruffles on his white shirt here. So again, that would be something where I'm going to select the white of his shirt, and I'm going to keep the kind of with the color family that we have here. So I'm going to go ahead and select that purple color of his face. And what my thought is that if I want to show the billowing of these ruffles on a shirt, kind of going in and out and in and out, the best thing I can do is maybe just a couple well-placed, make the brush a little bigger, well-placed kind of lowlights or dips that would be a darker area. So the white of the shirt is the highlight and the high point of the dip on his ruffle, and that a darker tone is where it's moving away from the viewer. So what I mean is just kind of doing stuff like that. So let's go ahead. Again, I'm using a pressure sensitive stylus, so I have the opportunity to really kind of push and make a wider feel here. Keep the things relatively soft, kind of spread out so they're not too linear. But again, let's go ahead and just hide that real quick. That gives me the opportunity to be able to. All right, let me go back here a few. There we go. It gives me the opportunity to control the nature of the airbrush. So a thin with not very much pressure is going to give me kind of a thin line like that. Holding onto that is going to give me a little bit of a fatter brush. So again, as you become more adept at using digital tools and styluses and stuff like that, again, you can do many things with one brush or one tool. So that's something that helps move a little faster and move a little quicker. So same thing here. I want to again go in, and I'll make a decision about that. I want to kind of have his eyes look a little more volumetric. So again, I'll just kind of go in here with my airbrush, pick that color, zero in, just get a deeper purple, and then just kind of sculpt around that eye. Again, I'm using a curved line because I'm mapping this to his eyelid. So it just yields and gives a little bit more of a feel. So with any of these things, and as I've mentioned before in other tutorials, knowing when to stop or knowing when enough is enough is, there's not really, it really comes from kind of a gut feel, and honestly it's just going to be something where a lot of times there'll be 3 or 4 times where I could stop in a drawing and it would be just fine, and when you go past that point, then you have to take it to the next stopping point. So ultimately with digital programs, you always have kind of the undo button. So if I really felt strongly that I kind of went too far with something or just took it past a point where it was interesting, um, ultimately I could step back a few points, step back a few steps, and get it to a point where I should have stopped. But like I said, I try and I think when I try and do this stuff, I give myself the flexibility to do that, but I also try and just to a degree kind of ride by the seat of my pants and really try and make that kind of as a decision that I make on the spot. So same thing. I think that ultimately, just as an artist, you're going to learn how to do that, and do a little just darker tone on his coat here. Again, get a really nice big brush, and then just kind of tone along that edge, and just kind of on his sleeve there, and just kind of take that down, and then just kind of goes that along the bottom there. And I was thinking about, again, here might be that instance where I make a little bit of a decision about how far to go. I was thinking about doing a highlight in his hair, and I may decide to undo this. So again, let's go back to that airbrush, a little smaller, and might be something where I pick maybe that purple, and let's just sort of see. So if we've got kind of a little bit of a light source, again, kind of coming from a little down and up here, I just want to kind of see how it's going to look if I maybe, I don't know, let's undo, maybe a brush, make my brush a little bit smaller, and just, again, I want to just sort of bop along the edges there, just sort of pick a few, just a few things that would emphasize or kind of serve that well. So again, maybe just there, just a few highlights here and there, just a few things to yeah, I think that's, yeah, I could live with that. I don't know if I'm absolutely in love with that one, but I'll commit to it for this drawing. So yeah, all right. So I think, and as I described in other videos too, I like using a controlled palette. So again, when I'm looking for colors here, you see that I was pushing to use kind of existing colors and pull from those colors to make things happen rather than trying to constantly run out to my full palette and kind of get paralyzed by choice. I think it's always better to kind of pick a small group of colors that works well and let those colors kind of work together and have a relationship, and kind of gives a unified feel as well, so that again, the internal logic of how the lighting is in this picture seems to at least all look like it's based off of the same thoughts. So yeah, so I think that looks pretty good. And again, we've got the feel that we've got in here is something that I'm happy with. We've got a nice textural feel for how this is working. Um, these things are enhancing the volume feel of the work that's in here. It's making this vector head shape have a little bit of dimensional wrap. The highlights in the hair help to give that a little more of a volumetric feel. But again, I'm not not trying to make everything the same either. I'm just trying to, again, do as few things as I can to get the effects that I want. So, yeah. And I'm working on a layer here, so if I wanted to, again, pick a pleasing complementary color, let's find like maybe a nice orange color, just do a little fill back there. There you go. That kind of plays nice with prints. Let's make a little. Yeah. I always love. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so there we go. So that's how I mess around with vector shapes that have been built in Illustrator, taken over to Photoshop, and then enhanced with the Dissolve Airbrush tool to make them feel more full, organic, and less vectory, but still looking vector-ish. So there you go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and call it. Let's say that's done for right now. If you have any questions or if there's any suggestions or requests for showing other things that you've seen me do, let me know in the comments, and I will be more than happy to address them in future videos. But for now, this is Paul Sizer. Thank you very much for stopping by. Again, be kind, be alert, draw every day, and I will talk to you soon. All right, take care. Thanks very much.